theory in the world of sport. Hi, those that don't know me, I'm Skylar. Oh, sorry. missed my mark. So yes, I look at sports a lot. My bachelor's degree is in sports management, so pretty much any paper I have written for my professors at some point is about sports. My work today is really the infancy of my thesis and the beginning stages of that work. It is nowhere near complete. I don't have results to share with you. It's really just kind of, here's where I'm at and here's where we're going. So yes, silent sportswomen in the world of sports, muted group theory, gender discrimination in sports. It's a major issue, but I played roller derby for 15 years, so I look a lot at how roller derby changes and challenges the norms of gender discrimination and gender biases in sports.
Did you say you do roller derby?
Yes, ma'am. For about 15 years.
16?
About 15, yeah. We'll get to that.
I didn't know 5-year-olds did.
I wish I was 15 years ago. So just kind of an overview, briefly going over muted group theory. I'm sure most of us know what that is, so I don't need to deep dive into it. Talking about the gender discrimination in sports, the application of muted group theory to sports, kind of looking at where we're at now, talking a little bit about roller derby and roller derby's history with inclusivity, and then talking about where we go from here. So, muted group theory, crash course, talks about the relationships between dominant and non-dominant groups of communication. The dominant group basically creates the rules and norms for the non-dominant group to follow, and the non-dominant group is essentially required to cognitively change the way they communicate in order to be heard or understood. Okay, gender discrimination in sports. It's a big, big issue. A 2008 study showed that 48.8% of student athletes were women. However, 15.5% of campus athletics leadership positions were held by women. Big disparity there. Nearly 40% of women in the sports industry admit to experiencing gender discrimination purely because they're women. Again, women make up nearly 40% of all athletic participation, but only receive about 4% of media coverage. One of the biggest issues that I look into a lot is gender testing in elite athletes. The biggest case of this is Caster Semenya. She was a track runner from South Africa. Essentially, to boil it down to simple terms, elite athlete women only are required to undergo gender testing to prove that they are women. This started back in the 40s. However, men don't do it. And I get real fired up about it. Essentially, Caster Semenya was barred from Olympic competition because her body naturally creates more testosterone because she's an elite athlete. And there have been tons of other women that have gone through this same issue because when you're at that level of competition, your body just naturally creates more testosterone than a quote-unquote regular person. So look into that if you're interested. So applying the muted group theory, this was part of my literature review for this study. There was a study around NFL tweets and how basically the NFL, 46% of their fan base identifies as women. But their tweets show stereotyping and degradation toward women, essentially creating an alienation of half of their fan base. Research also suggests that because women have been made the non-dominant group in sports, they are less likely to speak up about other issues. And at the athlete level, this could be, oh, I have a concussion, but I'm not going to tell my coach because then I won't get to play, or even more serious issues like sexual harassment, sexual assault. Women are just a lot less likely to speak up about it in sports. And essentially, muted group theory helps explain why this happens, but it doesn't really offer any solutions to the issue. So where are we at now? There has been very little research around mutagroup theory specifically applied to sports. The research that has been completed is extremely dated. The statistics that I showed you are from 2008 and 2010, so it's about time that we go over that again. The research also excludes the account for transgendered and non-cisgendered athletes, which today's world of sport definitely reflects those groups of people. And in order to accurately reflect the population of athletes, we would need to include them in this research. So where do we see gender discrimination and gender biases challenged and changed? Roller derby. I know roller derby is not as popular on the East Coast as it is where I'm from, in Phoenix, Arizona. So I do have a little clip to show you to kind of give you an idea of what roller derby is. Okay, will it click from here? Because I embedded the maybe, okay. So we might have to show it afterward.
Can you say?
So we'll show the clip after. So we'll talk a little bit about roller derby. Roller derby was created by an event promoter, Leo Seltzer, and made its initial debut in August of 1935. It's an old sport, but it actually started as a walkathon on wheels. Apparently walking was really popular in the 30s. And so good old Leo was scared that it was boring. So he put people on skates and just had them start skating laps. That was all it was at first. It's true. But again, a couple years later, good old Leo was scared that it was getting boring again, so him and a friend of his, Damon Runyon, got together and created what we now know as roller derby. Roller derby died down in the 40s and 50s, but hit a major resurgence in the 60s and 70s. In 1965, over 13,000 fans flocked to the championship game, and by 71, that crowd was over 19,000. These championships were actually held at Madison Square Garden. So if that tells you how big this was, it was huge. In 1972, roller derby athlete Sandy Dunn was interviewed by the New York Times and said, women tennis players and golfers aren't recognized as much as we are. We're equal with the men. And in 1971, our boy Leo, also interviewed by the New York Times, said, this is the only American sport ever created where men and women are equal. Unfortunately, in 1975, roller derby died again. A couple of teams tried to make a comeback in the 80s and 90s. It just really wasn't happening. But in 2001, a group of women from Austin, Texas, pulled roller derby from the grave, and it's been here to stay. So how does roller derby change the way we look at gender in sports? Modern roller derby, i.e. the 2001 resurgence, has always promoted inclusivity in the sport. In 2011, the Women's Flat Track Derby Association, or WFTDA, adopted a policy which was inclusive to transgender athletes. I actually played for the WFTDA when this happened, and it was completely revolutionary to the sport. We had a lot more participation from people who were actually fans prior to, and we were able to bring in a lot more people than we could have before. In 2015, WFTDA broadened the protections of gender identities in these athletes. Their statement actually said that WFTDA members felt that the old policy, which included references to trans women athletes' hormone levels, had the potential to exclude and discriminate, which does not reflect the WFTDA's values. To my knowledge, this information is hard to find, but to my knowledge, roller derby is the first and one of the only sports to do this at an organization-wide level. Every other major sport does it at kind of an ad hoc type of fashion. We have this one athlete, okay, we'll include them, but it's not done at an organization-wide level like roller derby has. So where do we go from here? Future research, I would like to look at the athlete perspective of the inclusivity of roller derby and kind of how roller derby challenges the norms of gender identity in sports. Roller derby athletes across the country will be surveyed. We've got a lot of connections in a lot of cities for athletes to survey. So those surveys will look at their own perceptions of how gender is handled in roller derby. But surveys will also be distributed to athletes of other sports to kind of compare and contrast on how roller derby is different from traditional sports. But that's really it so far. I am open to suggestions, questions, whatever you got for me. Oh, the video! Yes! We do want to see the video. It's so cool. If you just want to YouTube, I can pull it up by the title. Okay.
Are you gonna be in this
There's
video?
an F. I'm not in this video, but the last two pictures on that last slide, I was in.
Oh. We have to go back to it.
Oh, sorry. I'm gonna share the screen. We'll get back to it. I'm not good at this. It's a little different than what I'm sure some of you watched on television. It is not.
Next on Cronkite Sports Report,
It is not theatrical anymore. It is pure athleticism.
Do they don't use the, because I watched it from the time television started. Shut up, that's not even funny. But there were
You had to get up to
roller
turn it.
derby arenas.
Yeah.
It was all the slant.
So that's just the track type, and that's bank track. I played flat track roller derby, so it's flat track
so
roller
much
derby.
harder for flat track.
Yeah, the hits are a lot harder.
Yeah.
You fall hard when you hit the ground. You hit the ground. You don't bounce.
Yeah, it just looks terrifying.
Oh, it's fun.
Well, I know, but it's watching it. I mean, I just keep finding myself.
Did you have a question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like, what are the rules? Like, what's the goal? How do you score? Are you just trying to knock people down?
I could talk for an hour about roller derby. Josephine can actually attest. I told my entire class, I gave them a whole lesson on the rules of roller derby last semester. Essentially, there's 5 girls from each team on the track. 1 is a point scorer. The point scorer has to get through all of the other blockers, lap them, and then on the second pass, for every opposing player you pass, you get a point. That goes on for 2 minutes. There's a 30-second reset to get new players on the track. Goes on for 30-minute halves.
How many players are on a team?
It depends. Max is 15.
Oh, so like 3 teams.
3 groupings,
Three
kind
groupings,
of,
that's
yeah.
what I mean.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it kind of varies. You know, if you play for a smaller league, it could be as few as 9. 9 is the minimum. So. Yeah.
Yeah, the earlier slides had a couple of things, and preemptively, I would be curious to see in terms of image, history, awareness, and opportunities in the past about views about and how people perceive or saw women, and including now that we have all these tweaks, and I'll be curious to see how things have changed over the years, how we perceive them. Because, for example, Michigan, where we have these cases years ago until just last year, Simone Biles and company, before all of this came to light. I'm not sure what your views in terms of generation and opportunities, and those who were in charge kind of sweeping everything under the rug, and now we have social media and the listing, everything is on fire everywhere. I'll be curious to see what your research will find out.
Yeah, I'm very curious. Like I said, this is super infant stages of my thesis work, but it's definitely looking at how has everything with gender in sports changed. You mentioned perception. You know, roller derby athletes were perceived as these big brawly women back in the 60s and 70s, but now it's pure athleticism. It's supposed to, hopefully, fingers crossed, going to be in the 24 Olympics. Fingers crossed. But it's not, even with that, it's changed drastically for the perception of these athletes. So it's going to be interesting research. I'm excited.
Do men play roller derby?
Yes, but
I've never seen that.
So there are men's leagues, but they are few and far between.
Okay, so it's not common.
Right.
Okay.
And roller derby, when it hit the resurgence in the early 2000s, it was just women that played.
Right.
But now you see teams across all gender identities on one team. My most recent team in Kansas City, we had everybody of almost any gender, except men, actually. It was like everybody but the men. Because then they also had a men's team just up the road. So it was, you see any gender on one team. It's really interesting.
Because it's not really about musculature.
It
It's about
sure is
skill
not.
set. It's about skill sets.
Right. Right.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say,
Oh yeah.
you definitely don't appear the same as the ones back in the 60s.
I've been told that. I get a lot of, you play roller derby? You are not big enough to play roller derby.
And you're still alive.
I sure am.
Now, this sounds fascinating.
I love the work. It's the sport really gets me fired up. So yeah.
So what was the impact of, like, you hit on it, I just wanted you to reiterate, what was the impact of roller derby once WEFTA created their statement about making sure they were inclusive to the transgender community? Like, was there like a number for it, how it expanded for the league at that point, or was it pretty much like,
I can definitely find some numbers to include. Just from seeing it happen from an athlete perspective, our leagues grew a lot. I don't have an exact number, but just seeing how many new skaters we got after these policies were put in place. And after the second policy, where it was kind of like, okay, our first policy, we acknowledged that it could still exclude groups of people. After that second policy in 2015, I even saw more sports accepting of more transgender athletes, not creating these organization-wide policies like roller derby did, but being more accepting of other genders within the sport. Because gender segregation also plays a big part in this conversation as well. And then you see, after that policy, you would see, girls playing on the baseball team, or that kind of thing in high school.
Is it carried by ESPN, or who carries this?
Roller derby?
Yeah.
The athletes.
No, I mean, which media?
The athletes.
Oh.
We don't have a media.
Oh.
We actually got barred from ESPN for the skaters' skate names
Wow.
because they were quote unquote inappropriate. But that's a whole other conversation.
Are the coaches, is there an owner on a roller derby team?
The skaters.
The skaters own it. Is there a coach?
the skaters. It is completely a athlete-run organization. We create our leagues, we fundraise for our leagues, we coach our teams.
So it's all peer-to-peer. That could be why you've had these policies.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Men on the rest of the stuff.
But where is, like, I don't know, I guess how popular is roller derby in the US? Because I know, like, he asked, like, what platform are you on? And like you said, I mean, y'all are on none. So how popular are the leagues, like, in the US, or is it primarily outside the US? Like,
It is.
well, I know it's in the US. No, I haven't. This is a
Well,
very
that's like
experience.
10, so.
I mean, I really, like, truly, I've never heard of roller derby until I met you, so.
Yeah, it's way more popular on the West Coast than it is on the East Coast. So if you grew up here, I wouldn't be surprised if you told me you never heard of it, because it resurged out of Texas and then kind of moved west from there. Those of you that know,
Milwaukee and Chicago too now.
yeah, those of you that know Dr. Stoll also used to play roller derby.
What?
Yeah. So, it's definitely more popular on the West Coast. However, it is also super popular internationally. We have World's Championships every year, where the national team from every country gets together and we have a championship. Last year's was in Montreal.
I'm so curious because, like, you mentioned the Olympics. And so I was like, how the heck are we gonna have an Olympic team when, like, I personally have never heard of it.
We do have a Team USA. One of my former teammates actually plays on Team USA.
How do you get it?
On Team USA?
Yeah.
Or, yeah, you try out.
Oh, it's just tryouts, and all the members vote on each other?
There's, like, they establish coaches for the team,
Oh,
and
for
then the
national
coaches.
team.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Which
Are-
the
Are they
skaters,
women?
most of the time, yeah.
Okay.
Or non-cisgendered people.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Yeah. We just don't have, it's very rare to find a male coach.
Well, you wouldn't want one particularly.
Well, you know, you said it, not me.
I'm fine with saying it.
It's a ton of fun. I promise it's not as scary as it looks. But I love it. That's where we're at. Any other questions?